Good evening and welcome to the Royal Opera House. And welcome in particular to our audience here at the Claw Studio upstairs and to all of you watching live at home on YouTube. My name is Oliver Mears, Director of Opera here at the Royal Opera House. Tonight we are delighted to bring you a very special insight as we look inside the Royal Opera's new production of Puccini's La Bohème. Created by acclaimed director Richard Jones and conducted by music director Antonio Pappano, this is the first new staging by the Royal Opera of Puccini's great masterpiece in over 40 years. Let's take a look. Our new production of La Bohème will be on stage at the Royal Opera House here from the 11th of September and in cinemas worldwide on the 3rd of October. To find out more or to purchase tickets, please visit our website. Now, we have a sensational lineup this evening for tonight's Insight, and we first have soprano Nicole Carr and tenor Michael Fabiano to talk a little bit about their characters, what it's been like to rehearse this new production. Sarah Lenton will introduce the opera and the Paris that inspired it. Music director Antonio Pappano will give a characteristically insightful insight into this production and the music behind it. And finally, director Richard Jones will give us a preview of his new production. Now, we want to hear your thoughts, so please tweet us at #ROH Bohème. Let's get straight into it. Please welcome Sarah Lenton.
Thank you. Well, I think the first thing to establish is what is a bohemian. It's not someone who lives in Eastern Europe. It's an artist, probably young, and certainly living on the fringe. Yeah, that's a very good example. Any truculous, rebellious young man was likely to be called a bohemian in the 1840s. And as you can see from that picture, this guy has not combed his hair and he's not wearing a waistcoat. Henry Murger wrote some articles called Scenes from Bohemian Life, based on the life of him and his friends as they struggled to make their living in Paris in the early 19th century. They were mostly artists and bound together by youth and hope and poverty. Bohemia, Murger said, is in the department of the Seine. It is bordered on the north by cold, on the west by hunger, on the south by love, and on the east by hope. And the picture Murger drew of youthful idealism was so appealing that after him, Bohemia became a kingdom of the mind, open to anyone who's prepared to rent a garret, starve for art, and, most important, get away from the parents. The men were probably artists and students, and the women, early 19th century, were inevitably a class down. They were working women, seamstresses, cabaret singers, with lovers on the side. And though it sounded carefree, and you can see from posters of Bohème when it first came out, people went for the sort of jolly gay life of the Bohemians. Actually, the original Bohemians told a very different story. They laughed and they mucked around, of course, and they died. Murger was under no illusions. Bohemia, he said, is a preface to the academy, the hospital, and the morgue. And it is appalling, inappropriate death in the midst of young life that gives Murger's book and Puccini's opera their extraordinary power. Let's turn to the opera and see what Puccini made of it. It is a chilly show. The structure's quite austere. There are 3 cold acts, and when the warm weather comes in the 4th one, it turns out to be a bitter spring. The characters have the same name as Murger's Bohemian friends: Rodolfo, a poet; Marcello, a painter; Schaunard, a musician; and Colline, a philosopher. Of these 4, Puccini concentrates on Rodolfo and Marcello and provides them with 2 mistresses: Mimi, a maker of artificial flowers, and Musetta, a singer. And the show starts in the Bohemian's garret on Christmas Eve. Marcello is trying to paint his masterpiece, the Red Sea, and Rodolfo is not getting on with his magazine article. They're both cold and hungry, and they look at their empty stove. And Marcello says, I tell you what, why don't we burn the Red Sea? And Rodolfo says, no, the smell of paint will be ghastly. We can burn my masterpiece. And they burn one of his own plays. You hear the flicker of flames in the pit from the orchestra as it goes act by act into the stove. And halfway through, they're joined by Colline, their philosopher friend, and as the fire dies down, by Chouinard, the musician. And typically amongst a group of young artists, it's always the musician who's got a bit of money. They can always get a job somewhere, and today he's come back with food and firewood, but absolutely scouts the idea that they should eat it at home. It's Christmas Eve, for heaven's sake, let's have supper with the rest of Paris in some cafe. And they leave Rodolfo, in fact they give him 5 minutes to finish that wretched article while they go off to the cafe. So he's left alone, and he can't work, and there's a knock on the door. A woman asks him for a light for her candle. He opens the door, and it is Mimi. The young couple talk hesitantly for a while, but you can hear from the orchestra already some romantic feeling is happening in their sort of subconscious. The orchestra knows more than they do at this point. Mimi manages to drop her key. Rodolfo finds it quickly and quickly puts it in his pocket. Their hands meet in the dark, and he says memorably, "Your tiny hand is frozen," and tells her about himself, and she tells him her name. But before she launches into her famous aria, this is a good moment in the opera so early on, just to notice what Puccini's up to. There's also a little pause before she sings, flagging up an aria. And in fact, bohème is a miracle of pacing. This little scene has a quiet start, and it swells into 2 arias. It's interrupted by some impatient bohemians off stage. Where are you, Rodolfo? We want to go to the caf. And then Marcello's voice fades into the distance as he retreats, and Rodolfo sees Mimi in the moonlight. The lovers' subsequent duet rests in silence, and the act ends with them leaving the garret together. Well, the next scene is set at the cafe, and outside, Christmas Eve, the whole of Paris is there, buying things, eating, strolling around on Christmas Eve, and we discover that amongst the Bohemians, Marcello's in a grump. He's talking about love and what a silly thing it is and all the rest of it. At which point enter an unbelievably showy girl who makes a wonderful entrance, sees Marcello and sings a waltz song. And you immediately know what the problem is. This is Musetta, Marcello's ex-lover, who's just turned up with an elderly admirer. She's determined to get Marcello back, and the song breaks him down. So he bounds up at the end of the song, reconciled to Musetta. Mimi is already established with the other Bohemians. The only problem is how to pay the bill. If you don't know how they pay the bill, I won't spoil it. Suffice to say, all the Bohemians exit well-fed and happy. And Act 3 starts immediately with a very abrupt chord. Boom, just like that. It's as though it's waking us all up. We're at the Barrière d'Enfer. I think we've got a slide of that. Yes, there it is. It's snowing, as you see. Cold, cold world outside the Bohemians' garret. This is one of the gates into Paris. A couple of months have passed. Marcello and Musetta are working in a pub there. He's painting soldiers on the walls. She's singing. The snow falls steadily. Mimi enters looking for Marcello, and she's coughing. She knows that Rodolfo's in the pub, refuses to go in while he's there, and pours out her troubles to Marcello. She and Rodolfo have the most furious rows. Rodolfo comes out and she hides, and Rodolfo starts laying in to Mimi, to Marcello, claiming she's unfaithful. And then he breaks down and says, actually, she's coughing. She's dying. My freezing garret is killing her. I feel so guilty. Mimi hears this, and Rodolfo realises that she's heard everything he's said. The two of them come together at the very moment Musetta starts laughing in the pub. "The bitch," says Marcello. And he pulls her out, and they have the most furious row. as Rodolfo and Mimi decide to part, but not till the spring. You can cope with a broken heart better in the spring. But the act ends with that ominous chord, boom, and you think that spring is going to be short. Act 4 takes us back to the garret. Neither Rodolfo or Marcello can work as they brood on their broken hearts, but Chaunard rouses them. He's come in with a loaf of bread and some sausage, as usual. The young men start to muck around, and then suddenly Musetta is there. Mimi is at the bottom of the stairs. She's come back to die. They gather round her, appalled, wanting to make some sort of gesture to ease her last moments. Mimi's hands are still cold. Musetta whispers to Rodolfo that she'll get a muff. "How good you are, Musetta," says Marcello in one of the opera's classic understatements as they leave to go. Colleen decides to pawn his coat and sings a solemn farewell to it as he and Chaunard also leave and the lovers are together. They sing a duet, but the music is now fragile, the scoring almost empty. Mimi settles herself for sleep and fades away on a chord that Puccini marked P, 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 7 of them. Nobody notices she's gone. It's a very odd way to kill a heroine, and one that Puccini never repeated. The others come back and offer their futile gifts. Their anxious lines are tersely written, almost spoken, and it's left to Chaunard to notice what's happened. He calls the others to the bedside, and it's only when he looks at his friends' faces that Rodolfo realises the truth. His cry of Mimi ends the opera. It's a great show. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for that wonderfully interesting discussion. Now, later tonight, we'll be talking to Antonio Papano as he explains his vision for the music of this wonderful opera. But now, please welcome soprano Nicole Carr and tenor Michael Fabiano. Michael, I'm sure that the audience at home and watching live on YouTube will be very curious, and as well, Nicole, and to find out a little bit more about your view of these characters, these complicated characters. Maybe, Michael, you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I think it was beautifully explained. This story breaks down how death really hits us. And my grandmother passed away 3 weeks ago, and so death is something that's in my psyche at the moment. And certainly many of us have experienced death with loved ones. But the moments that precede death, the days that precede death, and the sense that death could happen is the real hell. And I think that's precisely the hell that Rodolfo faces in this opera. And as a character, I have to, as the opera progresses, specifically in the third act, block out the fact that I know death is about to come. And I mask it with a billion other things, that Mimi has all these problems that I can't have. And that's something that I think many of us can empathize with as human beings, that we want to mask the understanding that death is imminent. And it's reality. It's something that we all connect to. And so when Mimi ultimately dies, the torment of the death is so heavy and so filled with weight. And I hope I will be able to convey that as a character for all of you in the next few weeks.
And Nicole, you've performed this role in Sydney and Dresden, amongst other places. What is it about this score and this character that keeps bringing you back to it?
I think she is a simple, beautiful character to play. She knows that life is short for her. She knows that there won't be that many opportunities for her to enjoy another spring, to have another partner, to go out with friends again. She hasn't come from a wealthy background at all, and so she takes advantage of every little moment. You know, making her flowers in her apartment is a beautiful thing for her. Meeting Rodolfo in the stairs is a beautiful thing for her. Being able to go to the cafe on Christmas Eve is the most wonderful, exciting thing, because she gets to experience life. And I think that's something that, as a character, she never takes for granted. And I think as a person, it's something that I can learn from every time I do this role, every time I perform this opera. And so it's really interesting what Michael was talking about, because as much as he's really aware that her life will be short, so is she, and she takes it in a very different path. You know, she really wants to take advantage of everything that she can, and it's beautiful.
Michael, likewise, you've performed this role at the Met before. Do you discover something new every time you do this role?
Of course. I mean, even working with Maestro Pappano this trip, there are moments in the score that we all think that we know the music perfectly every time we do it, and we discover new moments that we uncover, new markings, even about frettando or a dotted note that I haven't even explored, and why they're there and why they exist and how we can make them be compelling for all of you. So it's a joy to be able to recreate this, especially in a new production when we have lots of time to explore and uncover the many layers of all of our respective characters that have, by the way, backstories that we have to interpret. I mean, as Rodolfo, I come to this not just singing the words and singing the notes, but having an idea of what Rodolfo was moments before the opera began. Where did he come from? Who was he? Maybe he comes from a family that might have had a little bit of money. Maybe he speaks a few languages. Maybe he's an individual that has had affairs with so many women one doesn't know. Maybe he has none. So the subtext to the character is something important, and it's something that comes forward with every new director we work with.
So does that mean you have to kind of wipe the slate clean a little bit
Every
before
time.
you turn up? Yeah.
Essential to wipe the slate clean. Conceived notions when you do a production of what a role is have to go away. The slate, one has to come at it as it's a new experience, and have the mind, the clarity of mind to say, okay, I'm here because I want to communicate something beautiful for everybody, and that requires us as artists to open ourselves to great ideas that might be new.
And Nicole, what do you find is the most challenging aspect about performing this particular role?
I think what Michael has said is the most challenging aspect, because you can't help but bring a little bit of the last Mimi you sang, or a little bit of the other production that you did that you loved so much in Act 3, or that moment in Act 2. And so when you walk in, especially with a new production, especially with something like this production, where you have, Maestro Pappano and Richard Jones at the helm, you know that you have these people who've explored every single inch of the score before you've even arrived on the first day of rehearsals. And so the most challenging part is to strip all of that back and to really try and be a blank canvas for the production that the conductor and the director are trying to create for us.
And what do you see as being the primary things that they wanted to strip back, so to speak?
I think they want it to be as real as possible. They want the characters' emotions to sit at the forefront of everything. I mean, you'll see the production itself is absolutely spectacular, but at the core of it is 4 men and 2 women who are living their life and have something very, very tragic happen to them.
Something that's spectacular about Bohème is it truly is an exploration of realism. I mean, in Verismo, in the style of Verismo opera, there's something totally real, totally visceral. And Bohème, I think, above all of the other Verismo operas that exist, really get to the core of just what human life is at its worst, what poverty feels like, what the cold feels like on your nose and on your ears and on your toes, and what not being able to light a fire is, and how not being able to pay a bill, how that feels.
So, Michael, would that affect the way that you perform the role compared to something like Mozart, for example, or Handel?
I don't sing any Mozart, sorry. No, of course, absolutely. I mean, this role and this style in particular requires us to be as real as we can, to be human beings without doing something that's outside of just the normal human action and interaction.
And Nicole, is there anything you can particularly identify in this character, in Mimi?
Oh, with myself?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she's gentle and she's kind and she's very thoughtful. And I love her way of bringing thoughts to life. And I think that's myself as a character as well. You know, I'm quite a pensive person, and so I love being able to bring that to her character, knowing that it's something that's kind of intrinsically inside of me.
And Michael, I mean, this opera has been performed 500 times at the Royal Opera House alone in the last 100 or so years.
Sure.
What is it about this opera that brings people to see it again and again?
The hope and tragedy. The aspirational quality of people thinking that at one point they can be a millionaire. You know, Rodolfo says something about being a millionaire, how he feels that that's possible. The hope of something so great, and in the same breath, the absolute terror of death. And I think that the two of those things combined creates a story that is so recognizable for all of us, hope and death.
And Nicole, in terms of the team that we have on board for this, Richard Jones and Antonio Papano, it's a pretty spectacular team, isn't it? How do you find working with them?
It's a dream team, really. I mean, I was very, very nervous in arriving for the first day of rehearsals. You know, we're a young group of singers, and sure, we've all done productions of Bohème before, we've done productions elsewhere around the world, but, you know, to work with Maestro Papano, who's been here for so long and is such a stalwart here at the Royal Opera House and around the world, and with Richard, who has directed the most beautiful shows, you know, all we want is to give as much as we can, and so to walk in on the first day of rehearsals and see them there and know that those are the people that we get to spend the next few months working with, and, you know, to try and achieve the same vision it's extraordinary, really.
So you feel in safe hands, almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They know these scores like
Well
the back of their
supported.
hands.
Yeah. And we're going to hear a little bit from Richard later on about his particular approach. I mean, how collaborative is that approach? I mean, how far did he bring you into that vision?
Well, I think Richard is a highly collaborative man. I mean, he certainly has a view of what La Bohème is. And I think any director that's directing a new production has to have an overarching position and then clear points, clear directorial points where the artists have, which with artists have to work. But he knows that us as artists have also performed La Bohème on many occasions, in many different iterations, and that we also have ideas that we can offer to the table, and layers in the text that we understand that he might interpret in a different way. And so in the room, I would say that there's a healthy compromise when it comes to instincts, impetus behind text, music, and even when the conductor and the director have converging ideas. And I think that leads to a really healthy environment that allows us to grow as colleagues and as a production and as a team.
And both of you have performed at the Royal Opera House before. Nicole, what's it like performing at the Royal Opera House in particular? Is there anything special about that?
I have to say, it's such a thrill. The first time I performed here was as Michele and Carmen, and to walk out onto that stage and to see, I mean, the view that we get of the audience is incredible. And, you know, the history, there are ghosts of singers past abound in this theatre, and, you know, to know the amount of world-class singers that have performed here and to be able to count yourself as one of them is truly a dream come true, and yeah, it's a thrill.
And what about you, Michael?
Oh, it's a great honor that I cherish, and know that, as Nicole says, we both follow in the footsteps of incredible artists, and it's extremely humbling to be here. And I couldn't be more grateful.
And without giving too much away, maybe, Michael, you could give us a little flavour of what this production is going to be like for the audience at home. And
that's a great question.
It's here as well.
I think no horses will be scared if this show is, when, you know, no one's going to jump up and down and be scared about it. And I think we can say that even if you stripped away all of the sets that we have built for this production,
Which are beautiful.
We have a beautiful bohème, even without them. And that's no slight against the production. It's just Richard has really instilled in us a great team and a great sense of camaraderie as a group. And even without all the dressings of La Bohème, if you have cohesion between all the characters, if it's even in a black box, Bohème can be the most special opera there is in the world.
And Nicole, is there anything about this opera you think is, I mean, obviously it was written in the 1890s, but is there anything in the opera that you think is still relevant to today?
I think the entire opera is still relevant to today. Absolutely. I mean, the story is a real life story. These things could still happen now. These things do still happen now. I mean, essentially, it's a group of friends, and it's their relationships, and, you know, tragedy happens in life. And I think that's why, as an audience and as performers, we relate to it so much now, you know, more than 100 years after it was written. And I think that's what makes it so special. That's what makes these operas so special, because they are relatable.
Fantastic. Michael and Nicole, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Now, still to come tonight, I'll be talking to Richard Jones about his vision for the new production. And in just a minute, Antonio Pipano will introduce us to the music of La Bohème. Now, don't forget, we want to hear from you tonight, so please tweet us your thoughts at #ROH Bohème. Now, please welcome Music Director of the Royal Opera House, Antonio Pipano, with repetiteur James Hendry.
Yeah, I just heard the two artists talking. I think they said everything I was going to say. So, yeah, basically the opera is the 1896 version of Friends. But what a beautiful story. I mean, Puccini finds incredible inspiration in these scenes of a bohemian life. And he lived that life himself as a student in Milan with his friends and other artists, Mascagni among them, Leoncavallo. And he went through that not knowing maybe where the next meal is coming from, the cold. And these are very, very important elements, the cold, and not having any money, and still having somehow living the exuberance of a young life, promise, love. It's the beauties of the delights of love, but also the vicissitudes, the difficulties, the cruelty of love, and then illness, and how illness can just rob you of your life, and how shocking that is when you're very, very young. The music, I think it's no accident. It's a beautiful, poetic idea that he stole the opening of this opera from one of his own student works, from the Capriccio Sinfonico. Now, I don't know if at the time, I don't think at the time he was thinking of writing this opera, but it captures the hustle and bustle, the chaos of young life in a way that I think is unique. It's famously difficult to conduct, very much like the opening of Beethoven 5, you know, very difficult, and conductors tremble. And yeah, I tremble when I have to start this one too, I must tell you. But you'll see why. If we play it really, really slowly, it's quite fascinating in that it's music that is unresolved until it finally resolves. Play it slowly. And it hangs. And then finally it resolves. There. Now, if you hear it at the real tempo, just conjure up the cold. This is drafts and breezes all the way through. Now, maybe that's not what the music was originally conceived for, but it captures the atmosphere of these two guys here, one painting, one writing, maybe not so talented, but still thinking that they're going to be the next stars of the future, you know, and that moment. And I think that music is absolutely brilliant. In the tenor's first phrases, where he talks about in looking out and seeing in the grey skies the smoke coming from the chimneys over Paris, there's a phrase. Play the melody. Okay, now we're going to hear that melody. Da 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 dee, da dee da dee. We're going to hear that melody later in the aria. But in this, guys, listen to how Puccini transforms that very quite jolly, or actually ya da da dee da 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 da, restless. He's cold. The chimneys are working everywhere else, but our chimney and our furnace is not working because we haven't fed it. We haven't given it wood. Here, listen. Later in the aria. With absolutely gorgeous harmonies, this music is later transformed. This is very, very important throughout this opera. He uses themes over and over again, but gives them a different disguise. Now, this was a technique that was initiated by Franz Liszt. Then it became something of Mr. Wagner's, and you've heard the word over and over again here in these Insight evenings, the leitmotif, the musical visiting card, if you like, of a character, of a sensation, of a thought, of a thing, and you'll hear these, like you'll hear Mimi's theme, for instance. Mimi, when she enters, before she even says a word, and we know the beginning of her aria, we know mi chiamano Mimi, we've heard it 1,000 times, but when she knocks on the door to cut, it's there already in the background, and the singers are singing over it, but her music is hovering there, and that's a fantastic effect to introduce the character with what will then become their signature tune, if you like. The horseplay of the four bohemians is incredibly virtuosic, and the music has a vividness, an actuality of the momentness, if there's no such word, but that's what it feels like. It feels like it's just being invented on the spot. It's so clever and honest because Puccini actually lived this life, and he knew the camaraderie, the joshing, the needling, that I imagine happens with young people when they're living, you know, 4 to a room and maybe there's one bed and the heating, there's no heating. I'm going to let you hear the arias. We know the story. The writer is left alone. There's a knock on the door, and he meets Mimi, and they go, her candle has been blown out. He blows out his candle to create atmosphere because he's taken with her. You know, he sees her, and he gets that feeling, which is so important in opera, but and in this opera, of course. And then they search also for her key, and they run into each other. searching for the key. In this production, it's done very beautifully because it's like it's a game between the two of them. And I don't want to give it away, but it's very, very natural and very brings a smile to your face. But he feels her hand for the first time, and he says how cold her hand is, and the aria is accompanied also by moonlight. But there's just if you listen to the harp play this. It's when he's not singing. Now you'll hear that music over and over and over again. You'll hear it at the end of Act 1. You'll hear it when Mimi dies at the very end of the opera. Which brings me to the point, the nostalgia at the memory of wonderful moments is so much a part of this opera. I don't have time to go through the whole opera tonight, but if we hear the two arias, in other words, where the two characters introduce themselves, he says, what do I do? Well, I live, I'm a poet, I write. How do I live? I live. But in my happy poverty, I spend like a great sir. I write rhymes and hymns of love, and I think of illusions and castles in the air, and I've got the soul of a millionaire. He has nothing, but somehow inside him he feels he's a rich man. And just now, the two eyes that walked in took all the jewels away from my box. In other words, all his ideas, his inspirations were just robbed by these two eyes that walked in. Her eyes, of course. Incredibly poetic and totally right for somebody who's a poet. He goes up to a phrase where he talks about sweet hope, and it's a beautiful phrase, and goes up to the high C, but we will have already heard that phrase earlier on. In his very, very first utterance, he goes, so what Puccini's doing is he's foreshadowing so much of the music that you're going to hear, and you don't even know that it's happening, but you hear these tunes over and over and over and over again. When Mimi introduces herself, she says, yes, my name is Mimi, but my real name is Lucia. And her aria, much less confident, she hesitates all the time. The aria stops and starts because she's never really had to explain who she is to anyone, really, or in this intimate a situation. And she's shy. My story is short. I'm a seamstress, and I'm tranquil and happy, and I sow lilies and roses, and I like those things that have a sweet poetry. She says that speak of love, of springtime. She goes on to tell us that she lives upstairs, but she's lucky because she gets the first sun of April, of springtime. And so the connection to nature for her is very, very important. She's a very, very natural girl. She doesn't have her head in the clouds like the tenor does. But, oh yeah, I'm sorry, the tenor. I get that. I apologize, Michael, but she's a dreamer anyway. She's a poetic soul, but through nature. Beautiful. And she finishes the aria as shyly as she starts it. I'm sorry for disturbing you. I'll leave now. She stays, and they have a beautiful duet. he turns to her and he says, "What a beautiful girl you are." And the theme of that duet very interesting that it goes into the minor there. Go ahead. So he develops that. But we will have heard that melody in his aria. But it does something else. When he talks about her gorgeous eyes. Huh? So again, foreshadowing, using melody, but transformed, transfigured, developed melody. So enough of me, let's hear some music. So we have David Kim and Francesca Cegina, who are going to sing for us. And this is nice. We haven't rehearsed or anything, so you're gonna sing. I'm gonna conduct a little bit. Okay, so do what I do, and that's that's not true. Just just sing your heart out, kid. Okay.
Per fortuna è una notte di luna e qui la luna l'abbiamo vicina. Aspetti, signorina, le dirò con due parole chi sono. Chi son? Sono un poeta, che cosa faccio? Scrivo e come vivo, vivo. In povertà mia lieta, sciallo da gran signore, rimedini d'amore, per sogni e per chimere e per castelli in aria. L'anima milionaria torna dai mio forziere fanciulla, o dolce viso di mite circonfuso e vallunar, in terra avviso il sogno chiamerai sempre sonor fra l'anima, le dolcezze Ramon dell'anima, dolcezze sei mio, aspetta gli amici, già mi mandi via, vorrei dir ma non oso, di che mi sarebbe così dolce restar qui, c'è freddo fuori. E starò vicina, e al ritorno curiosa dammi il braccio, mi appiccina. Obbedisco, signor. Che mi di? Io
There's nothing quite like it, is there? Really. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Tony, and all the best for the final weeks of rehearsal. Thank you also to repetiteur James Hendry, soprano Francesca Chiegina, David Young-Hoon Kim, the tenor, and those people who performed those excerpts from La Bohème so beautifully for us tonight. Now, if after tonight's event you feel inspired to find out even more about La Bohème, we have a free digital programme available on our website. To access it, please go to roh.org.uk/publications and type in the code FREEBOHEME in capitals. And now, to introduce us to his new production, director Richard Jones. Now, Richard, a new production of La Bohème at the Royal Opera House. That's obviously going to be a peak for any director. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be a director and how you got to this point.
How I came to be a director?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't something I planned from childhood. When I left university, I think I was very chaotic and undirected 20-year-old, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But I was a keyboard player, and I played in lots of shows, and I was a good sight reader. I wasn't good enough to ever get a job at the Royal Opera House or anything like that, but I could sometimes play 8 shows a week, and that gave me a lot of access to directors and actually watching directors and watching actors. And yeah, that was in the late 70s. And then you could direct plays and things like that in pubs, in sort of empty rooms above pubs. You can't do that. Young directors can't do that now. And then I went to Glasgow. The Arts Council used to train directors, and I got sent to Glasgow. And in Glasgow there is an opera company. And yeah, I was lucky enough to watch quite a lot of directors work there, actually. And yeah, I was in Glasgow for about 3 or 4 years, and then in 1988 I had 2 lucky things happen in 1988. David Pountney and Peter Jonas offered me actually 2 productions at the English National Opera, and Jonathan Miller offered me 3 plays actually at the Old Vic. And yeah, that was a very lucky year. And since then, and for a while after, I had to go back to playing the piano. But then
It's all been downhill since.
no, and then yeah, I've sort of managed to work, yeah, in theatre and in opera, yeah.
And
That's how I became a director.
Fantastic.
Does that answer your question?
It does, very thoroughly.
Okay.
And can you just tell us a little bit about your influences, any particular directors or styles that have influenced your work?
Well, I think as you get older, you're influenced. I'm influenced less, but I can remember things when I was much younger that really kind of went into my hard wiring, and I thought they were amazing things. Michael Bennett's production of Chorus Line was, I found that completely thrilling. I sort of thought the songs were funny and a bit silly, but I thought the staging was amazing. And there was a show based upon Genet by Lindsay Kemp. Lindsay Kemp was the person who influenced David Bowie very heavily. And I don't understand Genet, or I've never really sort of seen the point of Genet, but I can remember thinking this show was amazing. And I went and saw it again and again. Classical ballet is quite a good influence, I think, if you're a director, because they're very good tutorials on where the eye should look. And what else? Pina Bausch is very good on chaos. If you want to direct chaos. Yeah, does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
And you've directed many productions here at the Royal Opera House, The Ring Cycle, of course, and Lady Macbeth and Macbeth and Il Trittico,
On which
other
you,
things.
Oliver, were the 3rd assistant.
I was indeed. Was it the 3rd? I'm sure it was the 2nd.
Okay.
Anyway, only joking. But yeah, can you tell us a little bit about those shows that you directed here?
The Ring was that was very tricky. There was a very a difficult, actually catastrophic relationship with the conductor. That was not easy. No, and then there was a gap.
Why was that? What was the problem?
Well, it's one of those things I think you do learn. If you work in opera, there are certain sorts of bullets you've got to dodge. I think you've got to you've got to have a meaningful relationship with the conductor. And you can't have narcissism in the room, otherwise there's no show. I mean, the conductor, he was a very, this was the ex-music director, Bernard Haitink, he was a very fantastic and distinguished conductor, but I think there were 2 very purposeful and unaggressive men, which were me and him in the room together, and yeah, it was tricky. And I think the results were very uneven.
And what about the more recent work, like Lady Macbeth or Trittico? Or
When was
Nicole?
Lady Macbeth?
2004.
Okay, that's not so recent.
Trittico, Anna Nicole.
Yeah, there was. I've sort of worked there. Boris, I directed
Boris.
2 years ago. Yeah, and the Trittico, Anna Nicole, the Gambler stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Any highlights of those?
They were all great casts and very, very. Yeah, they were very positive operatic experiences.
And moving on to La Bohème.
Okay.
In this...
Okay.
In this production, which ideas have you chosen to explore or foreground?
That's a really tricky question to answer, and I'm not being disingenuous, but if it's when you have to go to Europe, and if you work in Europe, they say, what's the concept, gespracht? And I always feel very sort of cornered by that question. Well, look, if there's anything I'd like to highlight, it's how well the text is played and how vividly the characters are presented. That's really the most important thing to me.
And what's your process for creating a new production? With the designer, of course, in particular, but also the...
Oh, if it's an opera, if it's a play, it's slightly different. If it's an opera, well, I'd listen to it and listen to it and listen to it, read it until it was inside me. I draw it, I storyboard it on my own, and then I take it to the designer. The designer usually laughs at the drawings. And then, yeah, then there's a model built, and you bring a model here, and then they say, we can't do that, that's too expensive. Yeah.
And tell us a little
But
bit
the
about...
process, you want to know about the process in the rehearsal room?
Yeah, as well.
Oh, okay. Well, again, it's time. I mean, the people who are in this are very distinguished international opera singers. So I have 3 weeks in which I have to construct a complex piece of theatre. And I mean, if it was a play, you'd do a lot of backstory. You'd generate work that gave them a very strong emotional memory or an emotional memory of their character, which would make the character three-dimensional. And then you'd ask them to play. But here, I gave them a lot of stuff about backstory, and they have digested it. But I remember on the first day of this, there's this very fatiguing moment called the model showing, and you have to talk to the cast for the first time. And actually, for the first time, I kind of caught myself being rather fatigued by what I was saying. And I actually pointed at young James, who was playing the piano just then, and I made him stand up. And I made somebody else stand up who was on work experience. And I said, look, can you just remember it's about people who are of that generation? And that's the most important thing about this piece. But then we spent a bit of a morning going into backstory. But if you have 3 weeks, you have to work pretty fast. So I'd say with this, the scenes were on their legs fairly quickly. And I'd direct in terms of objectives and actions. And I'd say to the actor, what do you want? I'd say to Michael, who's playing Rudolfo, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to get? And it's all very straightforward from there. Okay.
And what's it been like working with Tony and this particular cast on this show?
Well, I've worked with Tony a lot, and yeah, he's a one-off, really.
How do you mean?
Well, he's like a sort of fantastic Italian workman, and you sort of expect him to sort of come into the rehearsal room with a bag or something, and he's relentless and very staggeringly expert. So he's really onto the singers about dynamics and where crescendos are, and yeah, and he doesn't leave off out of sheer passion, real passion. But when it comes to notes, I always say to him, "Can you go first?" Because you can sort of play a sneaky game of as he gives notes, you can realise how you can sort of adapt or develop what you've done, and you can pinch from him. And and conversely, I would hope that he would pinch from me, but I don't know. But I'm aware I always ask him to do notes first, so I can sneak a bit of interpretation in.
And what about this particular cast? I mean, have you worked with many of them before? Or
I've worked with Jeremy, who plays Benoit, and I think that's all, actually. I've worked with Luca, who plays Colline. I did a show in Aix-en-Provence with him, which was a Handel opera. Yeah, they're fantastic and all very different. Do you want me to talk about them?
Please.
Okay. Well, Michael Fabian, he's ferociously intelligent and very cautious in the way he approaches the part. And he wants to go for A, B, C, D, E. He wants everything to be... Yeah, he wants everything to be there. And then he hasn't performed out yet, but I can see how he will, and it'll be very released and fantastic. Nicole Carr is, yeah, that's very distilled, very beautiful acting. Yeah, and Marius Fenchen is this great heart and a very charismatic performer. I mean,
there's a great sense of ensemble that you've managed to.
I don't know. In
that
3
group.
weeks, that's tricky. They know each other because they go around the globe doing this stuff, so they do know each other. But
And what do you think it is about this particular opera, La Bohème, that's made it so unbelievably popular? I mean, it's one of the top 3 most popular operas in the repertoire.
yeah, I get that. Yes, yeah.
Why is that?
Well, it's ordinary life. I mean, people fight, people fall in love, people part, and it's very ordinary, and it bubbles along, and then something devastating happens at the end, and that's very shocking, and part of all our experience, and I think that's why people feel very strongly about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And is there anything that, in particular, in the themes of the opera that are particularly relevant to us now?
Yeah, well, there are themes of poverty and there are themes of ill health, but I think other plays I think other things can deal more, to deal in those maybe with more detail. But I think I think what's relevant about it is the experience of going to see it, because it functions to bring joy to your heart and also break your heart, and that's a very important and humanising experience, and it's relevant in that sense, I think. Does that answer your question?
It does, indeed. I mean, I remember one of the discussions that happened a while ago was about the materialism in the piece, and that's obviously really foregrounded in Act 2.
It is in this production,
Yeah.
yes, it is, in terms of the bohemian, the difference between the bohemians and the bourgeois characters who are in the Café Marmousse. But you'll see that if you come to the show.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I have one more question.
Yes.
In terms of your experience working in different houses, what is there that's particularly distinctive about the Royal Opera House, do you think? Why do you enjoy coming back here to make work?
Oh, it's very well run. And
I told him to say that.
no, it is. I'm sorry, you were the second assistant director.
I'll give you your 5 points.
Yeah, okay. Well, rehearsals start on time. That's very
Is
important.
that rare in the opera world?
Things can go awry in certain... But again, I think if you work in opera, you have to bullet dodge. You have to know that you have to work in places where rehearsals do start on time. And, yeah, it's...
Is there anything about... I mean, Nicole was talking about the ghosts in the building. Is there anything about that which is...
I'm not
inspirational
particularly a heritage sort of person, no.
Yeah.
I don't feel the spirits or the vibes.
I don't believe you.
Okay. Is that it?
That's it. Thank you very much, Richard.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right,
Thank you
thanks.
very much, Richard. Can't hear you. Thank you very much, Richard, for joining us tonight. We've been getting lots of lovely tweets and comments from our viewers on YouTube and Twitter tonight. We've had viewers from across the world this evening. India, Portugal, Russia, Peru, USA, to name but a few. And we've had some great messages on Twitter and YouTube. Manuel from Italy says, "Thanks for this wonderful chance to meet the people behind the opera." Mycroft Holmes on YouTube says, "I love the passion of this discussion." And Beta says, "Hi from Manchester. I saw the old production," oh dear, how's this going to go, "several times and look forward to the new one." Fantastic. Thank you very much for those comments. Now, don't forget that you can see this brilliant production of La Bohème on stage here at the Royal Opera House on the 11th of September and in cinemas worldwide on the 3rd of October. Thank you to Sarah Lenton, Nicole Carr, Michael Fabiano, Antonio Papano, Francesca Chiegina, James Hendry, David Jung-Hun Kim, and Richard Jones for joining us tonight. And a big thanks to our wonderful audience here in the Claw studio and to all of you watching on YouTube all around the world. Good night.